Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto built a demon queen harem with Rias, DxD, Mio, Shinmai, and Albedo? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sovereign of the Maelstrom. The end of everything felt like drowning in a sun. Pain was the first memory, a concept so absolute it transcended sensation and became a state of being. It was the shriek of a billion souls being unwritten, the groan of reality's fabric tearing like rotted cloth. He remembered the desperate, final surge of power, a choice made in a heartbeat when every other option had turned to ash. Sealing Kagaya was no longer possible. The only vessel left that could contain the sheer, world-breaking totality of her existence was him. He had reached out, not with a hand, but with his very soul, and pulled. Kagaya's silent, wide-eyed scream was not a sound, but a psychic shockwave that flattened mountains for 100 miles. The god tree, the vessel of a planet's lifeblood, was siphoned into the vortex he had become. It was a torrent of raw, untamed life, a force of creation so potent it was indistinguishable from destruction. He felt his own chakra, a vast and familiar ocean, evaporate in the face of this new, cosmic tsunami. His identity, his history, his very name, Naruto Uzumaki, was a grain of sand tossed into a supernova. He felt Sasuke's horror, Sakura's despair, Kakashi's resignation. They were distant echoes, fading stars in a sky that was collapsing into him. He was the singularity. The power didn't just fill him, it overrode him. Ancient memories that were not his own flooded his consciousness. The birth of stars, the silent drift of cosmic dust, the patient, predatory hunger of a goddess who had consumed worlds. He felt his physical form dissolve, his atoms unwriting their own laws to accommodate the impossible. He was no longer flesh and bone. He was a maelstrom, a chaotic, churning storm of golden divine energy and the abyssal, hungry void of Kagaya's power. Locked in an eternal, violent dance. Then came the snap. It wasn't a sound. It was the cessation of all rules. The dimension that had birthed him, the reality he had fought and bled to protect, could no longer contain the paradox he had become. It rejected him. With the force of a universe recoiling from a wound, it spat him out into the cold, silent, and infinite nothingness between worlds. The last thing he perceived of his home was the feeling of a connection, a bond he had cherished more than life itself, stretching taut and then, with a final, heartbreaking whisper, snapping forever. Then, there was only the drift. A long, silent fall through an endless, starless night. Consciousness returned not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, creeping thaw. The first sensation was the damp chill of grass against his cheek. The scent of wet earth and distant car exhaust filled his lungs. It was mundane. It was beautifully, achingly mundane. He pushed himself up, his movements fluid and silent, his body feeling both intimately familiar and utterly alien. He wore the same tattered black and orange jacket, the same torn pants from the final battle, but the body within felt denser, stronger. It was less a container for his power and more a focal point for it, a physical anchor for the storm raging within. He sat on the damp grass of a park at night, illuminated by the cold, sterile glow of a single street lamp. A swing set creaked rhythmically in the breeze. Beyond the trees, the lights of a city he didn't recognize painted the low-hanging clouds with a soft, orange haze. He was alive, he was whole, but he was adrift. He closed his eyes, extending his senses the way he had 1,000 times before. He reached for the familiar pulse of the world's nature energy, vibrant life force he could always tap into. He found it, but it was wrong. It was thin, weak, like a pale imitation of what he knew. It felt muted, as if he were listening to it through a thick wall of glass. Yet, beneath that, there were other energies, things his senses had no name for. One was a cold, sharp, and disciplined energy that felt like starlight given form. Another was a dark, acrid presence, like scorched metal and brimstone. And then there was his own power. It wasn't the warm, bright sun of his and Kurama's chakra anymore. It was a swirling, bottomless abyss inside his soul. He could feel the chaotic, life-giving energy of the god tree wrestling with the profound, space-devouring void of Kagaya's power. It was a maelstrom, and he was the eye of the storm. He didn't control it, he was it. He could feel its infinite potential humming beneath his skin, a power that could create a world or erase a galaxy with a single, focused thought. The sheer scale of it was terrifying. It made the tailed beasts, beings he had once considered the pinnacle of power, feel like little more than flickers of candlelight. He looked at his hand, turning it over in the lamplight. It looked the same, calloused fingers, a scar on his palm. But as he focused, a faint, golden aura shimmered around it, causing the very air to distort. He willed it to stop, and the light vanished. He was a god in a tattered jacket, a king with no kingdom, a memory from a dead universe. A profound, soul-crushing loneliness washed over him, more potent than any physical blow. He had won. He had saved everyone, and his reward was to be utterly, completely alone. A sudden spike of that dark, acrid energy tore him from his introspection. It was close, less than a mile away. It was potent, but it was also wild, enraged, and mixed with the metallic tang of blood. He felt other, similar energies converging on it, more disciplined, but still tinged with that same brimstone scent. A conflict. Normally, he might have ignored it. This wasn't his world, not his fight. But he also felt something else woven into the chaos, fear. The raw, desperate terror of a human caught in the crossfire. That, he could not ignore. Some things, it seemed, had survived being rewritten. He stood up, the grass barely seeming to register his weight. He didn't run. He didn't leap across rooftops. He simply took a step, and the world seemed to fold around him. The park vanished, and he was standing in the shadows of a derelict warehouse district, the sounds of battle echoing off stained concrete walls. It wasn't a jutsu, not body flicker or any transportation technique he knew. He had simply decided where he wanted to be, and the universe had, for a fraction of a second, obliged. He leaned against the cool brick of a building, content to observe for a moment, to understand the players on this new stage. In the center of a debris-strewn clearing, a battle was raging. On one side stood a group that looked like the wide stepped out of a strange high school play. A handsome blonde boy wielding a shimmering, European-style sword that moved with impossible speed. A small, white-haired girl whose tiny fists struck with the force of falling anvils, cracking the asphalt with every blow. A voluptuous young woman with black hair tied in a long ponytail, who laughed as lightning danced between her fingers. And at their head, a stunningly beautiful girl with hair the color of fresh blood, a crimson aura of destructive energy swirling around her hands. Their opponent was a monster. It was a grotesque fusion of man and beast. A hulking brute with leathery gray skin, a mane of filthy black hair, and 4 powerful arms, each ending in razor-sharp claws. It moved with a feral rage, shrugging off blows that would have leveled a building. Its power was crude, but immense. A stray devil, Rias thought, and a particularly nasty one. A former marquee class, if the remnants of its aura were any indication. Kiba, keep its attention. Kaneko, on its left flank, Rias commanded, her voice calm and authoritative despite the chaos. Akano, now, he is a feisty one, Akano Himahima purred, her smile a mix of sadism and delight. A massive bolt of holy lightning, a blasphemous fusion of light and dark, erupted from the sky and slammed into the creature's back. It roared in agony, the holy energy searing its demonic flesh. But it wasn't enough. With a bellow of fury, it spun, one of its massive arms catching Kiba Yudo in a backhand swing. The knight was sent flying, crashing through the wall of a nearby building with a sickening crunch. Kiba, Rias cried out, her concentration breaking for a second. It was the only opening the creature needed. It ignored Kaneko's piston-like punches to its side and charged directly at Rias. Its eyes, burning with mindless hatred, were locked on her. It was faster than she anticipated. She raised her hands, a sphere of pure destructive energy forming, but she knew she wouldn't be in time. The claws were inches from her face, the stench of its breath washing over her. And then, it stopped. The world went silent. The monster's forward momentum ceased so abruptly that it seemed to violate physics. Its claws hung suspended in the air, a mere hair's breadth from Rias's cheek. Its face was a mask of confusion, its roar dying in its throat. It tried to move, to strain forward. But it was held fast by nothing. A figure stepped out of the shadows, his footsteps making no sound on the gravel. He had bright blonde hair, like spun gold, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were ragged, but he walked with an unnerving, absolute calm, as if he were taking a stroll through a garden rather than stepping into a battlefield. It was Naruto. He came to stop a few feet from the creature's side, his gaze not on the monster, but on Rias. He looked at the fear in her eyes, the way she was braced for an impact that never came, and a flicker of something, a distant, painful memory, crossed his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice even and low. It wasn't a question born of panic, but of genuine, simple concern. Rias could only stare, speechless. Who was this? Where had he come from? His energy signature was non-existent. He felt like a human. A completely normal, powerless human. Yet the 10-foot-tall engine of destruction in front of her was frozen solid. Held by his will alone. The stray devil, finally locating the source of its paralysis, let out a gargled roar of fury and tried to twist its body to face Naruto. It strained, muscles bulging, veins like thick ropes on its skin. Naruto finally turned his head to look at the beast. His expression was one of mild annoyance, like a man being bothered by a buzzing fly. "Be quiet," he said. It was not a request. It was a command that echoed with a power so profound it felt like a fundamental law of the universe. The creature's roar was cut off as if by a switch. Its jaw snapped shut. Naruto raised his right hand, palm open, and slowly, almost casually, made a fist. Rias didn't see him move. She didn't see him cast a spell or launch an attack. She felt it. The space around the stray devil, the very air, the fabric of reality itself, seemed to dent. There was a low, gut-wrenching hum, like a bass note played on the strings of creation. The air grew heavy, impossibly dense. The stray devil's eyes widened in sheer, primal terror as it was compressed from all sides. Its bones didn't break, they turned to dust. Its flesh didn't tear, it was crushed into a homogeneous paste. There was no explosion, no gore, no spray of blood. One moment, the monster was there, a towering monument to rage and power. The next, it had been reduced to a single, black marble-sized sphere of hyper-condensed matter, which clattered silently to the asphalt before dissolving into nothing. Silence. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken buildings and the faint, terrified whimpers of the human they had been trying to protect, now cowering behind a pile of rubble. Akino's sadistic smile had vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Kaneko, her face pale, took an instinctive step back, her cat-like senses screaming at her that the person standing before them was fundamentally wrong. From the rubble, Hiba emerged, clutching his bruised side, his sword held loosely in his hand as he stared at the empty space where their enemy had been. Naruto looked at his closed fist for a long moment, then slowly uncurled his fingers, as if surprised by what they had just done. He flexed them, a thoughtful expression on his face. That was easier than he'd thought. He hadn't used chakra, not in the way he knew. He had simply willed it. He had imposed his will on the space around the creature, and reality had folded. Rias Gramori, heiress to one of the 72 pillars of the underworld, the crimson-haired ruined princess, a high-class devil famed for her intellect and power, finally found her voice. It was a strained whisper. "Who are you?" Naruto turned his gaze back to her. His blue eyes were clear, calm, and held a depth that seemed to stretch into eternity. He offered a small, tired smile. "My name is Naruto." Quote. It was an answer that explained absolutely nothing, and yet, in that moment, it felt like the most important name she had ever heard. This wasn't a stray magician. This wasn't a member of another faction. This was something else entirely. She took a deep breath, forcing her noble upbringing and years of training to the forefront, pushing down the primal fear that was coiling in her gut. She was a Gramori. She did not run. She assessed. "I am Rias Gramori," she said, her voice regaining its composure. She gestured to her companions, who were slowly gathering behind her. Their stances a mixture of wary and awestruck. "This is my peerage. You have our thanks." That stray was more powerful than we anticipated. "Peerage?" Naruto asked, the word foreign to him. "Gramori, you talk like your nobles." "We are," Rias said, a hint of pride in her tone. "We are devils." Naruto's expression didn't change. He showed no shock, No fear, no judgment. He just nodded slowly, as if she'd told him the sky was blue. Devils, he repeated, tasting the word. That explains the smell. Brimstone and something else. Ambition. Akeno let out a soft, nervous chuckle. My, what a perceptive nose you have. Naruto's eyes flicked to her. Yours is different. You have the scent of a devil, but also that of lightning from a clear sky. A fallen star. Akeno's smile froze on her face. He had, in a single sentence, identified her as a fallen angel hybrid, a secret known to very few. Rias's mind was racing, processing 1,000 different possibilities. A new player had appeared on the board. One with power that defied all known classification. The way he'd eliminated the stray. It wasn't demonic power, it wasn't holy power, it wasn't magic. He had simply commanded reality to execute his will. Such a feat was the domain of gods. True gods. You are not from around here, she stated, not a question but a conclusion. No, Naruto admitted freely. He gestured vaguely at the sky. I don't think I'm from this dimension, even. My home is gone. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a quiet statement of fact. This was a bombshell, an entity from another reality, possessing power on a godlike scale. The strategic implications were staggering. He was the ultimate trump card, a weapon that could shift the balance of power between the three factions forever. He was an asset she had to secure. You appear to be lost, and you saved me and my servants, Rias said, her tone shifting to one of gracious hospitality, the practiced cadence of a high-born leader. Allow me to offer you shelter. We can provide you with food, a place to rest, and any information you might require about this world. Naruto looked at her, then at her companions. He saw their wariness, their awe, and in the crimson-haired girl's eyes, he saw a spark of cunning. He knew what she was doing. She was trying to cage the hurricane, to put a leash on the maelstrom. He should have been offended. Instead, he just felt tired. He was alone in a strange new world, and for all her political maneuvering, her offer was genuine. It was a hand extended in the dark. All right, he said simply. Lead the way, Rias Gramori. The walk back to the old school building that housed the occult research club was a tense affair. Naruto walked beside Rias, his hands in his pockets, observing the world around him with a quiet intensity. He was a puzzle she couldn't begin to solve. He projected no power, yet she had seen him unmake a high-class devil with a gesture. He spoke with a simple directness, yet his eyes held the weight of ages. Once inside the plush, wood-paneled clubroom, Akeno immediately moved to make tea, a habit so ingrained it was her response to any situation, from casual conversation to post-godlike power demonstration debriefings. Kaneko curled up on a sofa, nibbling a chocolate bar, but her golden eyes never left Naruto. Hiba stood politely by the door, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. Rias sat opposite Naruto, studying him. The power you used, I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't senjutsu or magic. I don't know what it was, Naruto replied honestly, taking the cup of tea Akeno offered with a nod of thanks. He took a sip, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. This is good, thank you. Akeno's breath hitched. You're welcome. The simple, genuine gratitude was more disarming than any threat. Before Rias could press her line of questioning, the room grew cold. A crimson magic circle, emblazoned with the Gramori crest, bloomed on the floor. A pillar of light erupted from it, and a voice, smooth as velvet but carrying the weight of a continent, filled the room. Rias, report. Rias immediately stood and bowed her head. Brother. A holographic image of a man with the same crimson hair as Rias, but with a kind, powerful face and gentle eyes, flickered into existence. Sears X Lucifer, one of the four great Satans, ruler of the underworld. His eyes, however, were not on his sister. They were fixed on Naruto, who hadn't moved from his seat and was calmly sipping his tea. Sears X's calm expression didn't waver, but Rias could feel the immense, probing pressure of his demonic power wash over the room, a silent and overwhelming interrogation. It was the power of a super devil, a being who stood at the absolute pinnacle of their race. It washed over Naruto and dissipated. It was like throwing a stone into the ocean. There was no resistance, no counter-pressure. The power just vanished into him, absorbed without a ripple. For the first time since Rias had known him, A flicker of genuine shock crossed her brother's face. Rias, Sears X said again, his voice now laced with an edge of utter seriousness she had NLY heard a handful of times in her life. Explain. Now. Rias recounted the events quickly and efficiently. The stray devil, its unexpected strength, their struggle, and then the arrival of the stranger. She didn't try to explain the power she had witnessed, she only described it. He erased it, brother, from existence. Sears X was silent for a long moment, his gaze locked on Naruto. Naruto met his stare, his blue eyes unwavering. He gave a slight nod, a greeting between two beings who understood power, even if the scales were vastly different. Finally, Sears X spoke, his words directed not at Rias, but at Naruto. I do not know who you are or where you have come from, stranger. But on behalf of the House of Gremory, I thank you for protecting my sister. She was in trouble, Naruto said simply. I acted. It's nothing to thank me for. Nevertheless, Sears X continued, an act of such magnitude does not go unnoticed. The energy signature of your technique, or lack thereof, ca. used a momentary tremor that was felt all the way in the capital city of Lilith. This revelation sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. To use a power so great that its aftershocks could be felt in an entirely different dimension was unheard of. My sister has offered you sanctuary, Sears X said, his tone careful, respectful. I will honor that. Naruto, was it? You are to be treated as an honored guest of the Gremory clan. You will be afforded every courtesy. Then his voice lowered, directed only at Rias. Rias, a word of advice. Do not antagonize him. Do not attempt to recruit him into your peerage. Do not treat him as a potential subordinate. Treat him as you would a visiting king from a nation far older and infinitely more powerful than our own. Understand? Yes, brother, Rias breathed, the gravity of his words sinking in. I will be in contact, Sears X said, and his image vanished, the magic circle fading from the floor. The room was silent once more. Rias slowly sat back down, her mind reeling. Her initial plan, to assess and potentially recruit this powerful stranger, felt laughably naive now. Her brother, a being of unimaginable power in his own right, had just warned her to treat this man. This Naruto, not as a piece on the board, but as a player who could shatter the board and everyone on it with a whim. She looked at him again. He was leaning back in the armchair, his eyes closed. A picture of tranquility. He wasn't a weapon to be wielded. He wasn't a prize to be won. Sears X was right. He was a king, a sovereign without a throne. Her ambition, the core of her being, didn't vanish. It shifted. It transformed. The desire to gather powerful pieces for her peerage, to prove her own strength, was dwarfed by a new, far grander, and infinitely more terrifying idea. You don't recruit a king. You court him. You earn his favor. You stand by his side. A slow, genuine smile, the first one that evening that wasn't born of a sadist's glee or a politician's cunning, touched Rias Gremory's lips. This was no longer about winning a rating game or securing her family's honor. This was about winning the loyalty of a god. And Rias Gremory had always loved a challenge. Miles away, in a dark, rain-slicked alley on the other side of Kuo town, a figure stood cloaked in shadow. They wore the simple, unassuming robes of a traveling priest, but their eyes, when they caught the faint light of a distant street lamp, glowed with a soft, ethereal gold. In their hand, they held a small, crystalline device that hummed with an imperceptible energy. A voice spoke, not from the figure's mouth, but directly into the ether, a telepathic report transmitted across dimensions. Less than, field report. Anomaly confirmed. Greater than. The voice was flat, devoid of emotion, clinical. Less than, designation. Maelstrom. Origin point. Extinguished Universe 734 Delta. Subject is a mortal vessel amalgamated with a reality-level divine entity and the core life force of its origin world. Power level is unquantifiable, fluctuates between dormant and absolute. Greater than. The figure paused, its golden eyes staring in the direction of Kuo Academy. Less than. Initial contact with local demonic entities observed. Subject displayed conceptual level reality warping abilities with no discernible energy cost or casting method. Local classification systems are insufficient. This is a class -1 reality anomaly. Greater than. The Crystal in the figure's hand pulsed once, a silent acknowledgement from a destination beyond comprehension. Less than, recommendation. The standard pruning protocol is likely insufficient. The subject's very essence generates a gravitational pull on the dimensional fabric. Continued presence will inevitably lead to further timeline corruption and cross-universal contamination. Upgraded observation to a full Crusade level threat is advised. Awaiting judgment from the Arbiter. Greater than. With a final, silent transmission, the figure shimmered, its form dissolving not into light or shadow, but simply ceasing to be. The alley was empty once more. The only evidence of its presence the faintest smell of ozone and the cold, indifferent judgment of a power that watched from the spaces between realities. The Wardens of Order had taken notice. And their gears had begun to turn. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Oath of the Forsaken Princess. The following morning, the Occult Research Club building was saturated with attention so thick it felt like a change in air pressure. Rias's peerage moved with a strained, careful sort of quiet, the way people do around an unexploded bomb. The bomb in question was currently sitting on their plushest velvet sofa, staring out the window at the morning sunlight filtering through the trees of the Kuo Academy campus, a steaming mug of Akino's finest tea held loosely in his hands. Naruto had slept on that sofa, declining the offer of a bedroom. He said he preferred to be able to see the sky. He hadn't really slept, not in the way humans do. He had simply settled. He'd let his consciousness drift, sifting through the chaotic storm within him, trying to find the familiar shoreline of the man he used to be. It was still there, but it was a small continent on a world that was now 99% raging ocean. He watched the students below, laughing, chasing each other, complaining about homework. Their lives were so small, so beautifully simple. He felt a pang of longing so sharp it was almost a physical pain. He had fought a war to protect that kind of simplicity. Now, he was an eternal outcast from it, a ghost haunting a world that wasn't his. More tea, Naruto-kun. Akino's voice was a silky purr, but it lacked its usual teasing edge. It was cautious, probing. She stood beside the sofa, teapot in hand, her smile perfectly pleasant but unable to quite reach her eyes. "No, thank you, Akino. This is still warm," he said, not looking away from the window. He could feel her studying him, her and everyone else in the room. They were trying to measure him, to define him, to fit him into a box they could understand. Angel, devil, dragon, god. He was none of them, and it terrified them. Rias sat at her desk, pretending to review a stack of contracts, but her gaze kept flicking towards him. She had spent the entire night communicating with her brother via magical relays, compiling every scrap of information from every sensor and scout the underworld possessed. The reports were all the same. A massive, reality-distorting event of unknown origin, followed by nothing. Naruto Uzumaki was a ghost, a void in their sensory networks. He existed, yet he cast no shadow in their world of energies. "You're very quiet this morning," Rias said, finally abandoning her pretense of work. She steepled her fingers, assuming the posture of a leader about to negotiate. Quote, "I imagine you have many questions about this world. About us. I am happy to answer them." Naruto finally turned his head, his blue eyes meeting hers. "I have some. Devils, angels, fallen angels. You're all fighting a great war. You called it a long time ago. Now it's a cold war, full of posturing and proxy battles fought by children in school clubs." The barb hit its mark. Kiba, who was polishing his sword in the corner, stiffened. Kaneko paused with a cookie halfway to her mouth. Rias's expression remained placid. "The structure of our conflict has evolved. The rating games are a civilized way to settle disputes and maintain the hierarchy without resorting to open warfare that would devastate us all, as well as the human world." Civilized, Naruto repeated, the word tasting like ash. He looked back out the window. "I've seen what happens when beings with too much power decide to be civilized with each other. It's just a slower way to sharpen the knives before the real killing starts. You're all just waiting for someone to give you an excuse." His blunt, world-weary assessment hung in the air, stripping away their pride and leaving only the uncomfortable truth. They were soldiers in a long, drawn-out conflict, and they had romanticized it. This stranger, who had seen what true world-ending war looked like, saw their grand drama for the petty squabble it was. Perhaps, Rias conceded, her voice tight. But it is the world we have. We fight to protect our families, our territories, our honor. Honor, Naruto mused, a faint, sad smile on his face. I knew a lot of people who died for honor. They're still dead, and the people they fought are still dead. All that's left is the quiet. Be careful what you're willing to die for, Rias Grimori. Make sure it's worth more than the silence that comes after. Before she could formulate a response to that chillingly profound statement, Naruto's posture changed. His head tilted slightly, his eyes losing focus on the scene outside. The mug in his hand trembled, the tea sloshing over the rim. The relaxed, contemplative air around him vanished, replaced by an electric stillness. What is it? Kiba asked, his hand now gripping his sword's hilt. Naruto didn't answer. His senses, vast and alien, were constantly sweeping the local area, tasting the strange new energies of this world. He'd felt the faint thrum of demonic and holy powers all morning. The background radiation of Kuo town. But this was new, a sudden flare, a spike of energy that screamed on the edge of his perception. It was immense, a dormant volcano of power, chaotic and untrained. But it wasn't the power that caught his attention. It was the emotion wrapped around it, staining it, poisoning it. Fear, raw, abject, cornered animal terror. It was the feeling of a rabbit in a snare, of a soul screaming into a void. And tangled with it was the familiar, acrid stench of those devils, not like Rias's disciplined energy, but something fouler, more predatory. Hunters closing in on their prey. He stood up in one fluid motion, placing the mug carefully on the coffee table. The placid ocean was gone. The maelstrom was stirring. Naruto, Rias asked, rising from her chair. The change in the room's atmosphere was palpable. It was no longer tense. It was heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. Someone is in trouble, he said, his voice flat and cold. They're hunting a child. Wait, Rias commanded, moving to stand between him and the door. You can't just interfere. We don't know who it is, what faction they belong to. It could be a simple stray hunt. Or it could be an internal affair of another clan. Acting rashly could spark a diplomatic incident. He looked at her, and for the first time, Rias felt the full, crushing weight of the being she had brought into her home. His blue eyes weren't angry. They were something far more terrifying, absolute. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of the universe and was utterly unimpressed by the political squabbles of demons. A child is about to be killed, Rias, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Your politics do not interest me. Their fear does. He didn't walk around her. He took a single step forward. And for a fraction of a second, his form seemed to blur, to phase through her like a phantom. He was at the door before she had even finished turning to track his movement. Wait, she cried out, reaching for him. I'll be back, he said over his shoulder, and then he was gone. Not in a burst of speed, but simply, gone. The door hadn't even opened. He had stepped out of the room as easily as one might step out of a dream. Rias stood there, her hand outstretched, her heart pounding. The absolute authority in his voice, the casual dismissal of her world's most fundamental rules. Searsex's warning echoed in her mind. Treat him as a king. She had just tried to give an order to a hurricane. Akano, Kiba, Kaneko, we're going after him, she commanded, her mind racing. Find that energy signature. Now, I will not have a diplomatic war started because my houseguest decided to play hero. The world warped around Naruto. The familiar wood and velvet of the club room dissolved into a nauseating blur of color and light. He didn't know how he was doing it, this instantaneous travel. It was instinctual. He focused on the screaming beacon of fear, locked onto it like a destination, and his power. The chaotic maelstrom simply bridged the distance. He reappeared in the damp, echoing confines of a concrete underpass. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water, mildew, and blood. Ahead, bathed in the sickly yellow light filtering down from a street grate, the scene he had sensed was playing out. A young girl with startlingly vibrant, crimson hair, Hade even richer than Rias's, was on her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wore a school uniform that was torn and dirty. Her power, the volcano he had sensed, was rolling off her in uncontrolled waves, cracking the concrete around her, but it was unfocused, born of panic, not intent. Standing protectively in front of her was another girl, smaller, with silvery blue hair, holding a shimmering staff that crackled with defensive magic. Her knuckles were white, her face a mask of defiant terror. Surrounding them were 5 figures that oozed malice. They were humanoid, but their skin was a mottled gray. Their eyes glowed with a feral red light, and small, vestigial horns curled from their temples. They were low-class demons, but they were vicious, like a pack of hyenas cornering a wounded lion cub. Their leader, a taller, broader demon with a jagged scar across his face, sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Give it up, little succubus. Your barrier spells are failing. Lord Zolgir wants the girl. Hand over the heiress of the former demon lord, and we might let you live." The silver-haired girl, Maria, spat a wad of blood onto the ground. "Go to hell, Galcus. You will not lay a hand on Lady Mio." Brave words. Galcus chuckled, taking a slow step forward. "But you're out of magic, and she's too scared to even access her own power. This ends now." He lunged, his claws extended, aiming not for Maria, but for the girl behind her. Mio Naruse squeezed her eyes shut, a choked sob escaping her lips. This was it. After all the running, all the hiding, this was how it ended. The blow never landed. Naruto appeared between the demon and the girls. He hadn't moved from the shadows at the edge of the underpass, he was just there. He hadn't made a sound, but his sudden presence was more jarring than a thunderclap. He stood with his back to them, facing the pack of demons, his hands shoved casually into the pockets of his tattered jacket. Galcus skidded to a halt, his eyes wide with surprise. "Who the hell are you? Another one of her pathetic guardians?" Naruto didn't answer. He just looked at them, his blue eyes sweeping over the 5 demons. He saw their bloodlust, their greed, their casual cruelty. He felt Mio's terror behind him, a fragile, trembling thing that resonated with echoes of his own past, of people he had failed to protect. A cold, quiet rage began to build within him, an arctic pressure that made the air grow still. "He's just a human," one of the other demons hissed. "I can't sense any power from him. Let's just tear him apart." "Good idea," Galcus grinned, his confidence returning. "Kill him." Slowly, the 4 lesser demons charged, their claws glinting in the dim light. They fanned out, surrounding him, moving to overwhelm him with numbers. Naruto didn't move. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. He didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. He just watched them come. As the first demon swiped at his face, he tilted his head, the claws missing by a millimeter. At the same instant, a rod of pure, black, unholy light materialized from thin air and slammed through the demon's shoulder, pinning it to the concrete wall behind him. The demon shrieked, not just in pain, but in shock. The rod wasn't just a physical object, it pulsed with an energy that was actively suppressing its demonic power, neutralizing it. Before the others could react, it happened again. And again. And again. Naruto remained perfectly still as 4 black rods, each about a yard long and as thick as a man's wrist, shot out of nothingness. One pierced a demon's leg, nailing it to the floor. Another skewered a demon's outstretched arms, stapling them to the opposite wall. The 4th manifested horizontally, slamming into the last charging demon's chest and pinning it against its comrade. The entire fight took less than 2 seconds. It was silent, brutally efficient, and utterly terrifying in its effortlessness. There was no wasted motion, no grand display. Just the quiet, absolute imposition of his will. The 4 demons were neutralized, crucified against the concrete walls of the underpass, alive and conscious but completely powerless. Galcus, who had been about to charge, froze mid-stride, his jaw hanging open. He stared at his incapacitated subordinates, then at the blonde man who still hadn't moved a muscle. The sheer impossibility of what he had just witnessed short-circuited his brain. There was no spell, no incantation, no surge of energy. Those rods had just appeared. What are you?" he stammered, taking an involuntary step back. Naruto finally took his right hand out of his pocket. He flexed his fingers, then pointed one at Galcus. "You were going to hurt her." It wasn't a question, it was a judgment. Galcus felt a pressure descend on him. A gravitational force that had nothing to do with the planet. It was the weight of Naruto's focus, and it was crushing. He felt like an insect under a microscope, about to be squashed. Panic overrode his pride. He turned to flee. He didn't get a single step. Another black rod materialized in the air in front of him and slammed downwards, piercing the front of his tunic and pinning him to the asphalt floor. He was trapped, face down, his cheek pressed against the grimy concrete. Naruto walked over and stood above him, looking down with an expression of cold disappointment. "Tell me, why are you hunting a child?" Quote, "She's not a child," Galkus snarled, his voice muffled by the ground. "She's a monster. The daughter of the previous demon lord, Wilbert. Her power is a threat to the current regime. Lord Zolgir ordered us to capture her." Naruto's gaze flickered to Mio, who was now staring at him, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning wonder. He could feel the chaotic power swirling within her, a power she was terrified of. It felt familiar. It felt like him. He looked back down at Galkus. "She's a scared girl who's being hunted by thugs because of who her father was. That's all I see." He knelt, bringing his face level with the pinned demons. "So you were going to take her to this, Zolgir? And what was he going to do with her?" He wants to control her power," Galkus admitted, his voice trembling. "Use it for his own ambitions." "I see," Naruto said quietly. He stood up. The pressure vanished. He had the information he needed. It was in that moment of relief, the immediate danger having passed, that Mio's emotional state cratered. The terror, the adrenaline, the sudden, shocking rescue, it was too much. Her body, already under immense strain from the curse that bound her, finally gave out. She let out a soft cry, and the curse, the master servant pact placed on her by Zolgir, activated. A collar of shimmering, dark purple light materialized around her neck. Glowing ominously, it was a magical construct of absolute submission. "No, Lady Mio," Maria cried, scrambling to her side. She looked up at Naruto, her face pale with panic. "The pact, it's activating. It will bind her to the strongest magical being present. It will bind her to you." Naruto looked at the collar, then at the tear-streaked, terrified face of the girl wearing it. He could feel the magic of the pact reaching out, a tendril of dark energy seeking to latch onto his own immense power, to forge a chain of master and slave. He would become her master. She would be forced to obey his every command. Her power, her body, her very will would belong to him. It was the ultimate form of control, the very thing Zolgir had coveted. Rias and her peerage arrived then, skidding to a halt at the mouth of the underpass. They took in the scene in a single, stunned glance, the demons crucified to the walls, the leader pinned to the floor, and Naruto standing before a kneeling girl who was now shackled by a slave pact collar that was trying to connect to him. "Naruto, don't let it connect," Rias shouted. "Reject it. Push it away with your energy." But Naruto didn't push it away. He looked at Mio, at her terrified, pleading eyes, and he saw not a prize to be won or a tool to be used, but a kindred spirit. Someone cursed by a power they never asked for, hunted for a heritage they couldn't control. He would not allow her to be shackled. Not by Zolgir, not by him. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his will. He didn't touch the collar. He touched the concept of the curse itself. He felt the slimy, possessive magic of the pact, its rules of submission and control written into its very essence. And with the force of his own maelstrom soul, he began to rewrite it. To everyone watching, it was a spectacle of impossible power. The tendril of dark energy that was reaching for Naruto froze in midair. He met it with his own aura, a faint, shimmering gold that was not aggressive, but was infinitely more potent. "No," he said, his voice soft but resonating with an absolute authority that made the very air vibrate. "This is not how this works." He made a fist, and the tendril of dark magic shattered like glass. He then pointed a finger at the collar around Mio's neck. "You will not bind her." The collar flickered. It resisted, its ancient, powerful magic trying to reassert its purpose. "You will not chain her will to another," Naruto commanded, his voice growing stronger. "You will not make her a slave." The collar pulsed violently, the dark purple light warring with an encroaching gold. Mio cried out, feeling the conflict on a metaphysical level. "Your purpose is no longer submission," Naruto declared, his voice now ringing with the force of a divine edict. Your new purpose is protection. Her burden is now my burden. Her pain is now my pain. He took a step forward and placed his hand on his own chest. Your anchor is no longer a master. It is a shield, and I am that shield. You will bind to me. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The glowing collar on Mio's neck dissolved into a cascade of purple and gold light. For a heart-stopping second, everyone thought he had destroyed it. But the light didn't vanish. It shot across the space between them and coalesced, reforming not around his neck, but around his right wrist, hardening into a simple, elegant black bracelet with a single, faintly glowing purple gem set in its center. He had not destroyed the curse. He had intercepted it. He had taken it from her and bound it to himself, twisting its very nature from a shackle of slavery into an oath of guardianship. The underpass was silent, save for the dripping of water and the ragged breaths of those who had just witnessed a miracle. Mio stared at her own, now bare neck, then at the bracelet on Naruto's wrist, her mind unable to process the selfless, monumental act he had just performed. It was to this stunned silence that a new figure burst into the underpass, skidding to a stop on the slick concrete. He was a young man with brown, spiky hair, wielding a sword that shone with a faint, holy light. He was ready for a desperate battle. Mio, Maria, I'm here, Basara Tuju shouted, his eyes wide and wild. He then froze, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The crucified demons, the terrified but unharmed girls, and the stranger in the tattered jacket, now wearing a familiar-looking cursed bracelet, standing over the defeated demon leader like a guardian statue. What the hell happened here? Basara whispered, his heroic charge dying in his throat. Naruto ignored him. He looked at Mio, whose eyes were now filled with tears, but not of fear. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a dawning, fragile hope. He offered her a small, gentle smile. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe now. He then turned his attention to the pinned demon leader, Galcus. His smile vanished. He reached down and, with one hand, ripped the black rod from the ground, freeing the demon. He hauled Galcus to his feet, his grip like iron. Go back to your Lord Zolgir, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Give him a message from me. He leaned in close, his blue eyes boring into the demon's soul. Mio Naruse is under my protection. Her power is her own. Her life is her own. If you, or he, or anyone else ever tries to lay a hand on her again, I will not pin you to a wall. I will unmake you. I will erase you from every timeline, every memory, every last speck of dust in this universe. Your existence will become a rumor. Do you understand? He wasn't shouting. He was speaking with the calm, factual certainty of a god stating a law of physics. The threat wasn't a boast, it was a promise. And Galcus felt the absolute truth of it in the marrow of his bones. The demon, his face ashen with a terror far deeper than any physical threat could inspire, could only nod, his body trembling uncontrollably. Good, Naruto said, releasing him. Now take your trash and get out of my sight. He gestured to the other pinned demons, and the black rods holding them dissolved into nothingness. The 4 demons fell to the ground in a heap, scrambling away from Naruto as if he were the very incarnation of death. Galcus didn't need to be told twice. He and his subordinates stumbled over each other in their haste to flee, vanishing into the darkness of the underpass like frightened rats. The only ones left were Naruto's new, complicated entourage. Rias and her peerage, staring at him with unadulterated awe. Basara, the hero in training, looking utterly lost and out of his depth. Maria, the pragmatic succubus, gaping in disbelief. And Mio, the forsaken princess, the hunted monster. She looked at the man who had not only saved her but had taken her curse, her burden, upon himself. He hadn't asked for her power. He hadn't demanded her loyalty. He had simply offered her his protection, freely and absolutely. For the first time in a very long time, Mio Naruse didn't feel like a monster or a bargaining chip. She felt safe. She looked at Naruto, at the black bracelet on his wrist, her former shackle. Now his chosen oath, and a feeling she hadn't dared to feel in years began to blossom in her chest. Hope. Rias watched the scene, her brilliant mind struggling to catch up. Her plans, her strategies, her entire understanding of power and politics, It all felt like a child's crayon drawing next to the masterpiece of will and morality she had just witnessed. This man, Naruto Uzumaki, was not just a king of unimaginable power. He was a king with a soul, a sovereign with a moral compass so true it could bend the laws of magic itself. And he was now, by his own declaration, the sworn protector of the heiress to the old demon lord faction. She had worried about him starting a diplomatic incident. He hadn't started an incident. He had just drawn a line in the sand of her entire world and declared himself a nation of one. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Crimson Queen's Rebellion. The air in the Occult Research Club room had undergone another transformation. The tense quiet of the previous day had been replaced by a bustling, chaotic energy that was part refugee camp, part royal court in exile. Mio Naruse and Maria had been brought back to the club, the safest place Rias could offer. Mio, wrapped in a warm blanket and sipping a cup of sweet, calming tea Akano had prepared, sat on one of the sofas, her eyes rarely leaving Naruto. She was a bird with a broken wing that had just been rescued from a pack of cats, still trembling but beginning to understand she was in a sanctuary. Maria, ever the pragmatic succubus, was flitting about, peppering a bewildered Rias with questions about demonic politics, safe houses, and the Grimoire clan's official stance on harboring the heir of the previous demon lord. Basara Tuju, the self-proclaimed hero, stood awkwardly by the door. His holy sword sheathed but his posture radiating suspicion. He had been a man on a mission, the sole protector of two girls against the entire world. Now, he was just a bystander in a drama that had suddenly escalated far beyond his pay grade. And at the center of it all, the cause of the upheaval, was Naruto. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the sofa near Mio, patiently explaining to Kaneko how he had made the black rods appear. I don't really know, he was saying, holding up his hand. It's less like making something, and more like remembering it. I need a thing that binds, that holds. And my power gives it to me. He focused for a second, and a miniature black rod, no bigger than a pencil, materialized in his palm. It was solid, cool to the touch. Kaneko poked it with a curious finger, her usual stoicism replaced by a childlike fascination. It's just there. Rias watched the scene from her desk, a headache building behind her temples. In less than 48 hours, this being from another world had casually obliterated a high-class stray, declared war on a powerful demon faction by unilaterally claiming its most wanted fugitive, and performed a feat of conceptual magic, rewriting a master-servant pact that would have the greatest minds in the underworld scribbling frantic theses for the next century. Her brother, Sirzex, had been in contact almost constantly. The old Satan faction, the political bloc that supported the lineage of the previous demon lords, was in an uproar over Zolgir's failed attempt on Mio. The current Satan government, led by Sirzex, was now in the delicate position of mediating a crisis sparked by a man who answered to no one. Zolgir was demanding retribution against the unidentified agent who had interfered. The Tions loyal to Mio's late father were cautiously optimistic, seeing a potential new champion for their cause. The entire political landscape of the underworld was shifting, and the fulcrum was a blonde man currently playing with magic sticks for a cat girl. A sudden, sharp knock on the clubroom door cut through the low hum of conversation. It was a firm, arrogant sound, not a request for entry but a demand. Kiba, ever the vigilant knight, opened it. Standing in the hallway were two figures. The first was a woman in a maid's uniform with silver hair and a stern expression. Rias recognized her instantly as Graphia Lucifuge, the strongest queen in the underworld and, more importantly, her brother Sirzex's wife and right hand. The second figure, however, was the one who made Rias's blood run cold. He was a handsome young man with short blonde hair, dressed in a flamboyant red suit. He carried himself with an insufferable air of self-importance, his lips curled in a permanent smirk. Riser Phoenix, the man her family had arranged for her to marry. Rias, my darling, Riser said, his voice dripping with condescending affection as he strode into the room, not waiting for an invitation. I see. Aim as soon as I heard you were having some trouble. I thought my beloved fiancé might need my protection. His eyes swept over the room, dismissing her peerage as insignificant servants, before landing on Mio and Maria. And it seems you've taken in some strays. How charitable of you. Rias stood up, her posture rigid, her face a mask of polite fury. Riser. This is an unexpected and unwelcome visit. To what do I owe the displeasure? Quote. Riser chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. Always so fiery. It's one of the things I find so charming. I am here on behalf of my family and yours. Our parents have grown tired of your childish rebellion. The date for our wedding has been set. I am here to finalize the arrangements and bring you home. The room's temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Kiba's hand was on his sword. Akino's smile was gone, replaced by a thunderous scowl. Even Mio, who understood none of the context, could feel the oppressive tension. Naruto, who had been observing the exchange with a detached curiosity, finally spoke. Fiancé? He asked, his voice calm and even. He looked from Riser's arrogant face to Rias's barely contained rage. She doesn't seem very happy about that. Riser finally seemed to notice Naruto, still sitting on the floor. He looked him up and down, the tattered clothes, the relaxed posture, and sneered. And who is this? Another one of your pathetic servants, Rias. A human. By the looks of him. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Before Rias could unleash the torrent of destructive energy she was gathering, Graphia stepped forward, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. Lord Riser. That is enough. You are a guest here. She then turned her gaze to Naruto, and her eyes, for a fraction of a second, widened in something akin to shock. As a being of immense power and perception herself, she could feel it, the absolute, terrifying void where his energy should be. It was like looking at a black hole dressed in human clothes. She understood instantly why her husband had been so concerned. Lord Riser is here to formally announce the engagement, as is his right by the contract signed by the Grimoire and Phoenix families, Graphia stated. Her tone leaving no room for argument. Lady Rias, your father has agreed. The union will proceed. I will not marry him. Rias retorted, her voice trembling with fury. This isn't a union, it's a sale. My family is selling me to rebuild their prestige, and I will not be a part of it. You have no choice, Riser scoffed. A woman's duty is to her family. And besides, he added, a lecherous glint in his eye as he gestured to the 15 women who suddenly appeared behind him in a pillar of fire. His peerage, Riser has plenty of love to go around. You will be my beloved wife, and my other girls will be your sisters. It will be a wonderful family. Naruto watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. He saw Rias, a proud and powerful leader, being treated like property. He saw the arrogant peacock puffing out his chest, hiding his own insecurity behind a wall of inherited power and a harem of servants who looked at him with a mixture of fear and duty, not affection. It was a scene as old as time, and he hated it. He had fought to give people the freedom to choose their own paths, to forge their own bonds. This was the opposite of that. This was a gilded cage. He stood up, dusting off his pants. The simple movement drew every eye in the room. So, he began, his voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife. He walked slowly towards the center of the room, his gaze fixed on Riser. You think you have the right to force her to marry you because your parents signed a piece of paper. Riser bristled at being addressed by someone he considered a peasant. It is the way of our society. A deal is a deal. It is a matter of honor. You keep using that word, Naruto said, stopping a few feet from him. I don't think it means what you think it means. Where I come from, honor is about keeping your word, protecting others, and respecting their will. It's not about using a contract to claim a person like a piece of furniture. You dare lecture me, human? Riser snarled, a ball of fire igniting in his palm. You know nothing of our ways. I know what I see, Naruto replied, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. I see a coward who has to hide his family's name and a contract because he knows she would never choose him on her own. The insult was so direct, so utterly dismissive of Riser's status, that the entire room went silent. Riser's face went from smug to thunderous red. You will pay for that. I am Riser Phoenix, a high-class devil of the House of Phoenix. My blood grants me immortality. You are nothing. Immortality. Naruto tilted his head, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. Interesting. Let's test that. Before anyone could react, Naruto moved. He didn't use his reality folding step, he just closed the distance with pure physical speed that was faster than even Kiba could track. He grabbed Riser by the throat, his grip like a steel vise, and lifted him off the ground. Riser choked, his eyes bulging. He swung a fist wreathed in fire at Naruto's head. Naruto didn't even flinch. The fist connected with his cheek with a loud crack, and the flames washed over his face. When the fire cleared, Naruto's expression hadn't changed. There wasn't a single scorch mark on his skin. He hadn't even blinked. Riser's punch, which could melt steel, had been as effective as a child's slap. "My turn," Naruto said calmly. He didn't punch. He didn't use an energy blast. He just tightened his grip. Riser's eyes widened in horror as he felt something cold and corrosive seep into him from Naruto's hand. It wasn't just pressure. It was an energy that felt like acid to his very soul. He could feel his demonic power, his life force, being devoured. The flames of his family's regeneration, the source of his immortality, were sputtering and dying against this cold, ravenous void. "Stop." Graphia's voice was a whip crack. A blast of ice shot from her hand, aimed not at Naruto, but at the space between them, a warning shot. Naruto glanced at her, then back at the gasping, terrified Riser. He held him for a moment longer, letting the fear sink in, letting him feel the cold edge of a true death. Then, he casually dropped him. Riser collapsed to the floor in a heap, coughing and clutching his throat, looking at Naruto with sheer, unadulterated terror. He had felt his immortality fail. "Graphia-sama," Rias said, her voice shaking slightly. A mix of shock and exhilaration. "As you can see, the situation has changed. I have a guest who does not agree with my family's arrangements." Graphia's face was a stony mask, but her mind was in turmoil. This human had just effortlessly neutralized one of the most famously durable devils in the underworld. Searzex's warning had been an understatement. "A formal challenge has a process," Graphia said, her voice tight. "If you wish to contest the engagement, Lady Rias, you must do so through a rating game. Your peerage against Lord Riser's." "A game?" Naruto asked, looking at Rias. "He wants to settle this with a game." "It's a simulated battle," Rias explained quickly. "A formal, magically sanctioned duel between two peerages. The winner's terms are met. It's the only official way out of this." Naruto looked at Rias's small group. A knight, a rook, a bishop, and her. Then he looked at Riser's full set of 15 servants, who were now bristling with anger over the humiliation of their master. The odds were laughably skewed. "No," Naruto said, his decision absolute. He looked at Riser, who was slowly getting to his feet, his arrogant smirk replaced by a hateful glare. "This isn't a game. It's not about his peerage or hers. It's about you and him. Your freedom against his pride." He turned his gaze to Graphia. "Forget the rating game. I'll fight him. One-on-one. If I win, the engagement is voided, permanently. Rias is free to choose her own path. And if Riser wins," Riser spat, his confidence slowly returning as he remembered the official rules. "Then she marries me immediately. And you become my personal slave for a century, human." Naruto smiled. It was a cold, sharp, terrifying smile. "Fine." The audacity of the proposal left everyone speechless. A single, unaffiliated being challenging a full-blooded Phoenix to a duel for the hand of a Grimoire heiress. It was unprecedented. It was madness. "This is highly irregular," Graphia stated, but she was looking at Naruto. Seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes, she knew, with a sinking feeling, that no rule or tradition was going to stop him. This was going to happen, one way or another. It was better to have it sanctioned and contained. "I accept the challenge," Riser declared, eager to reclaim his honor. "In a formal duel, in a pocket dimension, where I can unleash my full power. I will burn you to ashes that even my flames cannot reborn." "Then it is settled," Graphia announced, a note of resignation in her voice. She produced a small, silver communication device. "I will inform Lord Searzex and Lord Phoenix. The duel will take place in 1 hour. Prepare yourselves." The pocket dimension was a vast, floating arena of stone surrounded by a swirling, chaotic vortex of purple and red energy. It was a sterile, empty battlefield, perfect for an unrestrained display of power. Rias and her peerage, along with Mio and Maria, stood on a floating observation platform, watching with bated breath. Is he really going to be okay? Mio whispered, clutching Maria's arm. That man, Riser, he said he's immortal. Naruto-kun took his punch without a scratch, Akeno said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and worry. But this is different. Riser will not hold back. Down in the arena, Riser stood with his arms crossed, a magnificent pair of fiery wings spread wide behind him. His confidence had returned in full force. He had been caught off guard, humiliated, yes. But here, in a proper battlefield, he could use his full arsenal. He would bombard the human with endless fire. And even if the human managed to land a lucky shot, Riser would simply regenerate and come back stronger. Victory was inevitable. Naruto stood opposite him, his posture as relaxed as ever. He looked around the arena, at the swirling chaos beyond its borders. It felt a little like home. Are you ready to be erased, human? Riser called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. There is still time to beg for mercy. Naruto just looked at him. Let's get this over with. Rias has things to do. That casual dismissal, the implication that this duel was merely an inconvenient chore, was the final straw. With a roar of pure rage, Riser erupted. Then burn. He unleashed a massive torrent of golden fire, a roaring tidal wave of flame that engulfed the entire half of the arena where Naruto stood. It was a fire hot enough to vaporize Diamond, an inferno of pure demonic power. Rias gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The fire raged for a full 10 seconds before Riser cut it off, panting slightly. The stone floor of the arena was glowing red, molten in places. Where Naruto had stood, there was nothing but shimmering, superheated air. Ha, see, nothing but talk. Riser laughed, triumphant. He's not even Ash. Are you sure about that? Naruto's voice came from directly behind him. Riser spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. Naruto stood there, completely unharmed. His tattered jacket wasn't even singed. He hadn't dodged. He had just stood there. And the fire had done nothing. How? Riser stammered. Your fire is hot, Naruto said, a thoughtful look on his face. But it's just energy. I have a lot more of that. He held up his hand, and a small, spinning ball of pure, white gold energy appeared in his palm. It wasn't a Rasengan. It was something denser, heavier. It was a miniature sun. A compressed sphere of the god tree's life-giving energy, refined and weaponized. You like fire? Naruto asked. This is what the heart of a star feels like. He didn't throw it. He opened his hand, and the sphere erupted outwards in a blinding dome of white gold light. It wasn't an explosion of heat. It was an explosion of pure, creative, life energy. Riser shrieked as it washed over him. To a being of demonic, destructive nature, this pure, untainted life force was the ultimate poison. It didn't burn him. It unwrote his demonic nature, trying to forcibly his very essence back to its base components. His flames of immortality flared wildly, trying to repair the damage, but they were like trying to patch a hole in a dam with wet paper. His body flickered, parts of him dissolving into motes of light before being violently regenerated. It was agony on a conceptual level. The light faded. Riser was on his knees, gasping, his body smoking, not from heat, but from the strain of his regeneration fighting a force it couldn't comprehend. You see, Naruto said, walking slowly towards him. Your power is to come back from being destroyed, to regenerate from injury. But what happens if I don't destroy you? What if I burn away the very thing that lets you regenerate? He reached Riser, who looked up at him with eyes now filled with primal fear. Naruto placed a hand on his head. Riser flinched, expecting another wave of agony. Instead, he felt a new kind of energy flow into him. It was corrosive, dark, and felt hungry. It was the other half of Naruto's power. The void of Kagaya. It didn't attack Riser's body. It attacked his bloodline trait. Riser screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror, as he felt the connection to his family's immortal flame being severed. It was like a string being slowly, deliberately burned through. Naruto was not just beating him, he was erasing his identity, taking away the one thing that made him a phoenix. Please, stop, Riser begged, tears streaming down his face. I yield, take it back, please. Naruto held the connection for a moment longer, letting the lesson sink in. Then, he pulled his hand away. The corrosive energy vanished. Riser collapsed, sobbing, feeling the fragile, flickering connection to his immortality slowly re-establish itself. It was still there, but it was damaged, scarred. He would heal, but he would never forget the feeling of it being taken away. Naruto looked down at the broken, weeping devil at his feet. He felt no satisfaction, only a weary sort of pity. He ached down and placed his hand on Riser's head again. This time, a warm, gentle light flowed from his palm. Riser's physical injuries, the strain on his body, vanished. His energy was restored, but the psychic scar, the memory of his power failing, remained. Naruto could heal bodies, but he wouldn't heal pride that had been rightfully broken. He looked up at the observation platform, his eyes meeting Rias's. He gave a slight nod. It's over. Then, something impossible happened. The very fabric of the pocket dimension tore. A jagged, black fissure, bleeding raw void into the arena, split the air 100 feet away from Naruto. It wasn't an attack, it was a backlash. The sheer, reality warping scale of the power Naruto had just used, the conflict between the ultimate life energy and the ultimate void energy, even on a small scale, had destabilized the pocket dimension's fragile laws. From the observation deck, everyone stared in horror. This wasn't supposed to happen. From the rift, something fell. It was a figure, humanoid, descending not with grace, but like a stone. It crashed onto the stone floor of the arena with a resonant thud that shook the entire platform. It was a woman of impossible, otherworldly beauty. She had lustrous black hair that flowed like a river of ink and golden eyes with vertically slit pupils. 2 feathered, black angel wings were furled at her back, and 2 curved white horns jutted from her temples. She was dressed in a pristine, elegant white dress that seemed utterly out of place in the desolate arena. She was unconscious, or dazed, a stray piece of flotsam tossed onto the shore by a dimensional tempest. Naruto stared at the newcomer, his senses on high alert. He could feel her power. It was immense, on par with Searzek's, but it was dormant, unclaimed, and it felt strangely artificial, like a perfect sculpture waiting for its creator's final touch. As he watched, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Her golden, serpentine pupils dilated, unfocused. They swept across the arena, past the broken form of Riser, past the swirling vortex of the dimension's edge. Then they locked onto Naruto. In that instant, everything changed. A wave of pure, unadulterated power, like a nuclear bomb detonating in absolute silence, erupted from her. But it wasn't an attack. It was an awakening. A series of complex, interlocking runes, invisible to all but the most perceptive of beings, flared to life within her very soul. Initializing. Core programming. Absolute loyalty. Searching for designated supreme being. Scan initiated. Target identified. Target. Naruto Uzumaki. Reason. Epicenter of dimensional collapse. Source of conflicting creation and void signatures. Highest quantifiable power level registered at point of genesis. Designation. Supreme Being. Master. Binding loyalty protocol. Activated. Albedo pushed herself to her feet. Every trace of confusion was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, ecstatic, rapturous devotion. She looked at Naruto not as a stranger, but as the very reason for her existence. With a grace that defied her sudden appearance, she crossed the distance between them. She didn't run. She glided, her feet barely touching the ground. She came to a stop before him, knelt down on one knee, and bowed her head in a gesture of absolute, unquestioning fealty. Her voice, when she spoke, was a melody of pure, unadulterate adoration that echoed in the silent arena. "My lord, Naruto," she said, her golden eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "I am Albedo, overseer of the Guardians. My life, my soul, my very being, was created to serve you. I have awaited your presence for an eternity, even if I did not know it until this very moment. I am yours to command. Forever." Rias watched from the platform, her mind completely blank. She had just won her freedom. She had just witnessed a display of power that redefined the very meaning of the word. And now, a being of immense strength and impossible beauty had literal. Why fallen out of a hole in reality to declare her undying, pre-programmed love and loyalty to the man who had done it all. A complex, bewildering, and undeniably potent mix of relief at her victory, awe at his power, and a sharp, unexpected pang of pure, undiluted jealousy swirled within her. Her life had just become infinitely more complicated. And infinitely more interesting. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Overseer's Shadow. The return to the Occult Research Club was less a victory march and more a parade of stunned silence. Riser Phoenix and his peerage had been unceremoniously ejected from the pocket dimension by Graphia, who had then departed with a single, long, inscrutable look at Naruto and a whispered promise to Searzex to explain everything. The word, everything, felt woefully inadequate. Now, the club room felt even more crowded. The original occupants, Rias's peerage, were trying to process the day's events. The refugees, Mio, Maria, and Basara, were trying to understand their new, bizarre reality. And then there were the epicenters of the chaos. Naruto sat in his usual armchair, the black bracelet, Mio's former curse, a stark contrast against his skin. He was quiet, observing the newest addition with a thoughtful, analytical gaze. Albedo. She stood at attention near the center of the room, a perfect, beautiful, and utterly terrifying statue of devotion. Her posture was impeccable, her hands clasped demurely in front of her, her black wings furled so tightly they barely disturbed the air. Her golden, serpentine eyes, however, never left Naruto. They tracked his every subtle movement, every breath, with an intensity that was part adoration, part guard dog. She hadn't been created, she had arrived. She was a living, breathing paradox, a being of immense power whose entire existence was predicated on a single, unwavering directive: serve Naruto Uzumaki. So, Akeno said, breaking the thick silence as she set down a tray of tea with hands that were only trembling slightly. You just appeared from a tear in reality. The moment of my genesis coincided with my lord's demonstration of his absolute authority over the foundational laws of that pocket dimension, Albedo explained. Her voice a melodious contralto. Her gaze flickered to Akeno for a fraction of a second, an unspoken and chillingly effective assessment of a potential threat, before returning to Naruto. My core programming identified him as the supreme being, the anchor of my existence. Thus, I was born into his service. Core programming? Kiba asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He didn't see a person. He saw a golem, a magical construct of unknown origin and terrifying capability. So you have no will of your own. You're just a puppet. A flicker of something, the first genuine emotion other than adoration, crossed Albedo's face. It was a flash of indignant fury. My will is to serve Lord Naruto. That is the highest and most noble will a being can possess. To question, it is to question the very nature of perfection. Her hand drifted to her side, where a non-existent weapon seemed to ache to be held. That's enough, Naruto said, his voice calm but firm. The effect was immediate. Albedo's posture softened, the killing intent vanishing as if it had never been. She bowed her head slightly. As you command, my lord. Naruto sighed, running a hand through his blonde hair. He looked at Albedo, and he saw more than just a powerful servant. He saw a brand new life, born into a world of impossible expectations, shackled by a purpose she didn't choose. It was a familiar story. Albedo, he said, his tone gentle, you don't have to call me, Lord. My name is Naruto. To call you by your name without a title would be an act of gross insubordination and disrespect, my lord, she replied instantly. As if reciting a sacred text. It is unthinkable. Then think it, he said simply. Your core programming, is it all you are? The question seemed to throw her. She stood silent for a long moment. Her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I am the overseer of the Guardians, she began, as if accessing a file. My purpose is to manage my lord's domain, to protect his person, to eliminate his enemies, and to ensure his every desire is met with swift and perfect execution. She paused, then added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a fervent, almost painful honesty. And I love you. More than anything in existence. That is also my core purpose. Rias, who had been quietly observing, felt that sharp, unfamiliar pang of jealousy again. It was absurd. This woman was barely a few hours old. Her love was programmed, artificial. And yet, the sheer, unwavering totality of it was a force of nature in itself. This love, Naruto pressed, his voice still gentle. Is it just part of the program? A line of code, or do you feel it? He tapped his own chest. In here. Albedo looked down at her hands, then back at him, her golden eyes wide with a dawning, frightening uncertainty. The program dictates that I feel it. Therefore, I feel it. The feeling and the directive are one and the same. It is a perfect, unassailable love. Nothing perfect is real, Naruto said softly. And nothing real is perfect. Real feelings are messy. They get complicated. They can hurt. He stood up and walked over to her, stopping directly in front of her. She looked up at him, her statuesque composure beginning to crack. I'm not going to be your supreme being. I'm just a man who's a long way from home. You're free to serve me if you wish, but I want you to do it because you choose to. Not because you were built to. Your feelings, your will, they are your own. You get to decide what they mean. Understand? He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of black hair from her face. It was a simple, human gesture. Albedo flinched as if struck by lightning. Her programming gave her no protocol for this. There was no directive for how to respond to gentle, unconditional acceptance. Her perfect, unassailable love was suddenly faced with an imperfect, complicated reality. For the first time, a tear, born not of ecstatic joy but of profound confusion, traced a path down her cheek. I understand, Lord Naruto, she whispered, the title a mixture of ingrained habit and newfound reverence. This quiet, philosophical debate was interrupted by the frantic tapping of Maria, who had commandeered a laptop from one of the club members and had been furiously researching. Guys, I think we have a bigger, more immediate problem, Maria announced, her voice squeaking with alarm. I've been monitoring underworld news feeds and chatter from the old Satan faction. Zoldyr is beyond furious. He's not just demanding retribution, he's put out an open bounty. A massive one, on Mio's head. Mio, who had been starting to relax, flinched as if she'd been slapped. A bounty, Rias said, her expression hardening. That's a brazen move. It's a direct challenge to my brother's authority and a flagrant insult to my house, now that she is under my protection. It gets worse, Basara added, speaking up for the first time. He'd been quiet, observing his initial suspicion of Naruto warring with the undeniable evidence of his character. Zoldyr isn't just some random ambitious fool. He has powerful backers who want to see Mio's power controlled or eliminated. A bounty means every greedy, low-life demon, every mercenary, every assassin looking to curry favor with the old guard will be coming for her. The sanctuary of the club room suddenly felt very fragile. It was one thing to fend off a single pack of demons. It was another to be the target of a faction-wide manhunt. Albedo's demeanor changed instantly. The confused, emotional being vanished, replaced by the cold, efficient overseer. Unacceptable, she declared, her voice devoid of warmth. Her eyes glowed with a faint, golden light. A threat to a person under my lord's protection is a threat to my lord himself. All threats must be neutralized. Immediately, she turned to Naruto, her posture now that of a general reporting to her commander. My lord, give me the order. I will locate this Zoldyr. I will infiltrate his stronghold. I will dismantle his organization from the inside out. I will bring you his head before sunrise. The sheer, brutal efficiency of her proposal was chilling. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that she could do it. No, Naruto said, shaking his head. That's not how we're going to do this. But, my lord, Albedo protested, a swift, decapitating strike is the most effective strategic option. It eliminates the source of the threat and sends a clear message. It sends the message that we solve our problems by acting like assassins in the dark, Naruto countered. It makes us know better than him. And it doesn't solve the real problem. Killing Zoldyr just creates a power vacuum. Someone else, maybe someone smarter and stronger, will take his place. The bounty will remain. They will still come for Mio. He looked at Mio, who was trembling again. We don't need to hide her. We need to show them they can't touch her. What do you suggest? Rias asked, intrigued by his line of thinking. He wasn't thinking like a warrior, he was thinking like a leader. We turn this club into a fortress, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping the room. Not with walls and traps. With presence. We let them come. And we make an example of the first ones who try. He turned back to Albedo. You said your job is to be an overseer. To protect my domain. Well, this is it, for now. This building, and everyone in it. Your job is not to go out and hunt. Your job is to be the shield. Can you do that? Albedo's eyes widened. He wasn't just giving her an order, he was giving her a formal duty. A purpose that aligned with her core programming but was framed by his own morality. He was trusting her. A slow, genuine smile, the first one she had ever truly owned, spread across her face. It was a terrifyingly beautiful sight. Yes, my lord, I can do that. Nothing will breach these walls. Nothing will harm a single person under this roof. I swear it on my life. Night fell. A tense, watchful quiet descended upon the Occult Research Club. Kiba stood guard at the main entrance, his senses heightened. Akeno had woven subtle electrical wards around the perimeter, designed to alert them to any magical intrusion. But everyone knew the true security system was the woman in the white dress who now stood perfectly still by the large bay window, staring out into the darkness. Albedo was a monument of lethal stillness. She hadn't moved in hours. Her senses, far beyond what any devil in the room could muster, were mapped to the entire campus. She could feel the faint life signs of every sleeping student in the dorms, the rustle of every leaf on every tree, the faint, telltale flicker of demonic energy coalescing in the woods at the edge of the school grounds. Inside, the others tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Mio had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the sofa, with Kaneko curled up at her feet like a small, sentient guard cat. Rias was at her desk, a magical communication circle open as she relayed Naruto's plan to a deeply concerned Sirzex. Naruto sat beside the sleeping Mio, watching her. The bracelet on his wrist was cool to the touch. He could feel a faint echo of her troubled dreams through their new, bizarre connection, fragmented images of running, of being hunted. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and a wave of calm, golden energy flowed from him into her. The trembling stopped. Her expression softened into a peaceful slumber. You're good at that, Basara said quietly. He had taken up a position near the other side of the room, still wary. But his hostility had faded into a grudging respect. Calming her, I mean. She's been through a lot, Naruto said, not taking his eyes off Mio. Fear is a poison. Sometimes all you need is a reminder that you're not alone. I was supposed to be the one to protect her, Basara admitted, his voice laced with frustration. My clan. We have a long history with the heroes who fought the old demon lords. I made a promise, and you kept it, Naruto said, finally looking at him. You stood in front of her when those things came. You were ready to die for her. That's all that matters. His gaze was unnervingly perceptive. You're worried you're not needed anymore. Basara flinched, the truth of the statement hitting home. You can do things I can't. That hing with the curse, the way you handled Riser, I'm just a guy with a sword. And I'm just a guy who's lost his home, Naruto countered. Rias is a princess with the weight of her family on her shoulders. Albedo is a newborn trying to figure out what it means to be alive. We're all just people, doing what we can. This isn't my fight to take from you, Basara. If you want to protect her, then stand with us and protect her. The simple, direct acceptance seemed to settle something in Basara. He nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. Right. It was then that Albedo spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet room like a diamond shard. They're here. Everyone tensed. Rias ended her communication with Sirzex. Basara drew his sword, Brynhildr, its holy light flaring to life. How many? Rias asked, moving to the window to stand beside Albedo. 12, Albedo reported, her voice utterly calm. A mixed group, mostly low to mid-tier mercenaries. But they're being led by something else. A high-class specialist. Her eyes narrowed. He's a shadow user. Very skilled. He's masking the others, moving them through the dark spaces. An infiltrator. An assassin. He's not planning a frontal assault, Rias deduced. He's going to use the mercenaries as a distraction while he slips in to kill Mio. A sound strategy, Albedo conceded. Against a lesser opponent. She turned her head slightly, her golden eyes meeting Rias's. They will make their move in 30 seconds. The main force will attack the front door as a diversion. Hiba is at the door, Rias said. He can hold them. He will not have to, Albedo said. She then looked directly at Naruto. My lord, your orders were to act as a shield. Do I have permission to be thorough? Naruto nodded slowly. Don't kill them if you don't have to. But make sure the message is understood. Albedo smiled, a brilliant, predatory flash of teeth. Understood. Exactly 30 seconds later, the front doors of the club building exploded inwards. Blasted off their hinges by a volley of demonic energy. A gang of snarling, brutish demons, wielding crude axes and swords, stormed into the entrance hall, their roars echoing in the building. Find the girl. The bounty is ours. Hiba moved to engage them, his sword a blur of silver light. But in the main room, a deeper darkness was gathering. A shadow in the corner of the room, where the light of the lamps didn't quite reach, began to deepen, to stretch, to coalesce. It rose from the floor, a humanoid shape of pure blackness, a pair of glowing red eyes its only feature. In its hand, it held a blade of solidified shadow, dripping with an energy that screamed of poison and instant death. The assassin had bypassed all their wards. He was inside. His target, the sleeping girl on the sofa, was just a few feet away. He moved, silent as the grave, his shadow blade raised for a killing strike. He never even got close. Albedo was simply there, standing between him and Mio. She had crossed the room without a sound, without a flicker of movement anyone could track. In her hand, she now held a weapon that hadn't existed a second before. It was a massive, monstrous battle axe with a black, ornate handle and a shimmering, translucent blade that seemed to be made of captured starlight. Ginnungagap, her personal weapon. The assassin reacted with instincts honed over centuries of killing. He abandoned his attack on Mio and thrust his shadow blade at Albedo's heart. Albedo didn't dodge, she didn't parry, she met his attack with a lazy, almost contemptuous downward swing of her colossal axe. The two weapons met. The shadow blade, a thing of pure, intangible darkness, should have passed through the physical axe. It did not. The moment it touched Ginnungagap's blade, it shattered, dissolving into a harmless puff of black smoke. The assassin's eyes widened in disbelief. Albedo's follow-through was a fluid, inescapable arc. The flat of the massive axe head slammed into the assassin's chest. There was no blood, no crunch of bone. There was only a dull, resonant thump, and the assassin was sent flying backwards, tumbling through the air like a ragdoll until he slammed into the far W. All with enough force to crack the reinforced stone. He slid to the floor, his shadowy form flickering violently, completely incapacitated. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 3 seconds. Albedo rested the head of her massive axe on the floor, the weapon's size and weight seemingly inconsequential to her. She looked down at the twitching form of the assassin, her expression one of utter disdain. An amateur, she scoffed. To think this was the best they could send. She walked over to the downed assassin. A dark, menacing aura began to radiate from her, a pressure that made the very air feel thick and heavy. Now then, she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. Let's have a little chat. You're going to tell me everything. Who hired you, who you work for, and who gave your masters the courage to challenge my lord. Quote. She reached down, her hand glowing with a dark light, and placed it on the assassin's head. He let out a muffled, psychic scream as she bypassed his mental defenses and began to forcibly extract every secret, every memory, from his mind. Downstairs, the sounds of battle had already ceased. Hiba stood in the ruined doorway, his sword clean. The 12 mercenaries were lying on the floor of the entrance hall, groaning. Each of them had been neatly and efficiently disarmed and hobbled with precise, non-lethal strikes to their joints. The message had been sent. The fortress had held. The shield had not failed. A few minutes later, Albedo stood before Naruto again, her work done. The assassin's body had been disposed of. He no longer existed in any meaningful way. I have the information, my lord, she reported, her tone once again that of a diligent subordinate. The bounty was indeed placed by Zolgir. However, the assassin was not in his employ. He was hired by an intermediary. A third party. Who? Rias asked, stepping forward. Albedo's expression darkened. He did not know their name. But the mental imprint was clear. The one who hired him. The one who provided the intelligence on our location was a man who cloaked himself in the guise of a human priest. A man with golden eyes. Naruto went still. Golden eyes. The description resonated with a deep, primal part of his being, a warning bell from the amalgamated memories of Kagaya. A memory of beings of law and order, of cosmic judgment. This priest, Albedo continued, her voice grim. He did not pay the assassin with money. He promised him power. The power to cleanse the world of demonic filth. He was a fanatic, a zealot. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about demonic politics anymore. The bounty was a smokescreen, a tool being used by an outside force to probe their defenses. The wardens of order were no longer just watching. They were moving their pieces onto the board, using the existing conflicts of this world as their camouflage. They were manipulating the factions, stoking the fires, all to get a clearer shot at him. Naruto looked at the sleeping form of Mio, at the determined faces of Rias and her friends, at the unwavering loyalty in Albedo's eyes. They were all in danger, not just because of who he was, but because they had chosen to stand with him. The wardens didn't just see him as the anomaly anymore. They saw his new family as part of the corruption. His expression hardened, the weary traveler replaced by the resolute king. Albedo, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. Good work. It was a simple phrase, but to Albedo, it was the highest praise she could ever receive. Her face lit up with a brilliant, radiant smile. I live to serve, my lord. The immediate threat was over, but the true war had just cast its first, long shadow over their lives. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Golden Crusade. The aftermath of the failed assassination attempt was a fragile, deceptive calm. The underworld's bounty network went silent. Word of the swift, brutal, and absolute failure of the Furs attempt had spread like wildfire through the mercenary circles. The message Naruto had wanted to send had been received. The Occult Research Club was not a soft target. It was a fortress defended by a monster of unknown power and loyalty. For the moment, the greedy and the opportunistic were content to wait and see who the next fool would be. Life within the club room settled into a strange new domesticity. Mio, feeling safe for the first time in months, began to slowly come out of her shell. She spoke in more than just whispers, even sharing a shy smile when Kaneko offered her a piece of chocolate. Basara, having accepted his role as part of a larger team, began training with Kiba, their swords clashing in the woods behind the school in displays of friendly, if intense, rivalry. Maria, a bottomless well of curiosity, became Albedo's shadow, peppering the overseer with endless questions about her origins, her powers, and the nature of her core programming, all of which Albedo read with unnerving patience and precision, as long as it didn't distract from her primary duty, watching Naruto. Rias found herself in the unfamiliar position of being a political linchpin. Her home was now the de facto embassy for a new, undeclared power faction. She spent her days in long, complex negotiations with her brother, trying to explain a situation that was fundamentally inexplicable. He was no longer just the Grimoire heiress, she was the chief diplomat, and sole handler, for a being who could rewrite reality on a whim. The pressure was immense, but she felt a thrill she'd never known. This was real power, real consequence, and Naruto watched it all. He was the quiet eye of the hurricane, his presence a constant, comforting weight. He'd listen to Rias's political frustrations, offering simple, direct advice that often cut through the Gordian knot of demonic posturing. He'd watch Mio's slow, tentative steps toward normalcy, his expression soft. He'd even engage Albedo in long, quiet conversations, trying to coax the person from behind the programming. What did you see? He asked her one afternoon as she stood guard by the window. Before you arrived here, do you remember anything? Albedo frowned, a rare expression of deep thought. There was nothing, a void, and then a command. A single, overriding imperative. Be loyal, be perfect, be his. Her golden eyes met his. And then I saw you, my lord. You were the first thing I ever saw. You were my genesis. So you have no past, Naruto mused. Only a future. My past is irrelevant, she stated. My future is to serve you. That's a purpose, he said gently. It's not a future. A future is something you choose. What do you want, Albedo? She opened her mouth to give the programmed response. I want to serve you, but she paused. His question, his insistence on her personhood, had created a logical loop in her perfect programming. A choice. The concept was alien and terrifying. I do not know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I have never been asked. It was a moment of profound, quiet connection, a seed of genuine identity beginning to sprout in the fertile soil of his acceptance. But the peace was not destined to last. It was the calm before the storm, and the storm was coming from a direction no one in this world was prepared for. It began not with a bang, but with a change in the light. The afternoon sun, filtering through the windows, began to shift, its warm, yellow hue bleaching into a cold, sterile, and unnaturally brilliant gold. The air grew still, the chirping of birds outside falling silent. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the very foundations of the building, a sound that felt less heard and more imprinted directly onto the soul. Everyone in the club room froze. Rias's peerage, their demonic senses screaming, looked around in alarm. Basara drew his holy sword, its light flickering as if intimidated by the new presence. What is that? Mio asked, her voice trembling as she shrank back against the sofa. Naruto was already on his feet, his gaze fixed on the sky outside the window. His face was grim. He recognized this energy. It was a sterile, absolute power. Devoid of malice but filled with a cold, implacable judgment. It was the energy of the golden-eyed priest, magnified 1,000-fold. Albedo, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Get everyone away from the windows. Now. Albedo didn't question him. She immediately moved, herding the others toward the center of the room, her beautiful face a mask of cold fury. As you command, my lord. Naruto walked to the bay window and looked up. The sky above Kuo Academy was tearing open. It wasn't the violent, chaotic rift that had birthed Albedo. This was a clean, precise, and deliberate incision. A perfect circle of incandescent golden light bloomed in the sky, a gateway to another reality. It pulsed with a power so immense it made Searsex's aura feel like a candle flame in a hurricane. From the gate, they descended. They looked like angels, but they were not the angels of this world's heaven. These beings were terrifying in their perfection. Clad in ornate, golden armor that seemed to be forged from solidified light, they were silent, their faces hidden behind impassive, featureless helms. They moved with a synchronized, preternatural grace, their white, feathery wings beating in perfect, silent unison. They carried weapons, lances of golden light, swords that hummed with cosmic energy, shields that shimmered with absolute defensive power. There were hundreds of them. A legion of divine soldiers pouring from the gate and arranging themselves in perfect, geometric formations in the sky. They were the purifiers, the foot soldiers of the wardens of order. At their head, floating before the celestial legion, was their leader. This one was different. Its armor was more ornate, its presence more commanding. The helmet was retracted, revealing a face of androgynous, impossible beauty. With skin like polished marble and eyes that burned with the same cold, golden light as the gate behind it. It held no weapon. It didn't need one. Its very presence was a weapon. The being raised a hand, and a voice echoed across the entirety of Kuo town, a voice that was not a sound but a telepathic broadcast, calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. Less than, inhabitants of this designated timeline. Do not be alarmed. We are the wardens of order. Our purpose is not with you. We have come to correct a cosmological error. Greater than. The voice was met with stunned silence from the city below. But in the occult research club, everyone knew exactly what, and who, it was talking about. The leader's golden eyes, visible even from this distance, locked onto the window of the club room, directly onto Naruto. Less than, temporal anomaly 734 Delta. Codename. Maelstrom. By the authority of the Arbiter of Balance, your unsanctioned existence is hereby declared a terminal threat to cosmic stability. You have corrupted this timeline and its inhabitants. The period for observation has ended. The era of sterilization begins now. Greater than. The leader, Lyrial, lowered its hand. Less than, surrender yourself for uncreation, or we will sterilize this entire region and all life corrupted by your influence. You have 10 seconds to comply. Greater than. The ultimatum was absolute. It was not a threat. It was a statement of procedural intent. Corrupted, Rias whispered, her face pale. They're talking about us. They're going to kill everyone. Naruto turned away from the window, his expression colder and harder than anyone had ever seen it. The time for quiet observation was over. The enemy he had suspected, the beings whose cold logic had destroyed countless worlds, had finally shown their face. And they had threatened his new family. Rias, he said, his voice sharp and commanding. Get the civilians out. Your peerage, your responsibility. Create a barrier. Evacuate the school. Do whatever you have to do. Keep them safe. What are you going to do? She asked, her heart pounding. I'm going to give them their answer, he said. He looked at the others. Mio, Basara, stay with Rias. Stay inside the barrier. Mio looked terrified, but a spark of defiance lit her eyes. But, we can fight. I can help. Your power is immense, but it's uncontrolled, Naruto said, his tone softening slightly but losing none of its authority. Right now, the most important way you can help is by staying safe. Let us handle this. He then turned to Albedo, who was practically vibrating with restrained power, her hand gripping the handle of her massive battle axe. Her knuckles white. My lord, she said, her voice a low growl. Let me be your vanguard. I will shatter their legion. No, Naruto said, we do this together. He looked from Albedo's fierce, loyal face to Rias's determined one, then to Mio's frightened but resolute expression. This wasn't just his fight anymore. This is our home they're threatening. We defend it as one. The 10 seconds were up. Lirial, floating in the sky, showed no emotion. It had expected this. Less than, compliance refused. Initiating Protocol Gamma. Regional sterilization. Greater than, the Legion of Purif. Eyres raised their lances in perfect unison. The tips began to glow with terrifying intensity, gathering golden energy for a volley that would wipe the entire school, and a good portion of the city, off the map. They never got the chance to fire. A storm erupted from the Occult Research Club. Not a storm of wind and rain, but of raw, untamed maelstrom energy. Naruto appeared in the sky, hovering 100 yards in front of Lirial. A whirlwind of chaotic, golden-black chakra swirling around him. The sheer pressure of his presence caused the air to shimmer and distort, the purifiers, perfect formations wavering for the first time. You made a mistake, Naruto's voice boomed, amplified by his chakra, echoing across the sky. It held no telepathic sterility, only raw, human fury. You threatened my home. You threatened my people. Lirial tilted its head, its beautiful face a mask of clinical curiosity. Less than, your people. They are contaminated data, collateral damage in a necessary cosmic function. Your emotional attachments are a symptom of the chaos you represent. Greater than. Then let me show you what this chaos can do, Naruto snarled. He raised a hand, and the sky darkened. Not with clouds, but with a presence. 9 colossal, spectral forms, each composed of swirling, malevolent chakra, materialized behind him. The tailed beasts. They were not the living, breathing beings he had known. They were constructs, memories given form by his maelstrom power, but they were no less powerful. Kurama's spectral form, larger and more ferocious than ever, let out a silent roar that shook the very fabric of the dimension. From the ground, Rias and her peerage watched in utter awe. This was the true power he had been holding back. Akeno, Kaneko, Kiba. Full defensive barrier. Protect the school, Rias commanded, shaking herself from her stupor. Now, she unleashed her own power, a massive wave of crimson power of destruction that formed the first layer of a shield over the campus. Akeno's holy lightning, Kiba's sword generated force fields, and Kaneko's raw physical reinforcement all slammed into it, creating a multi-layered dome of crackling energy. The battle began. The purifiers, undeterred by the display, launched their first volley. Hundreds of lances of golden, purifying light streaked towards the ground. They were met by a volley of tailed beast bombs. The spectral constructs opened their mouths and unleashed a barrage of concentrated black and purple spheres of energy. The two opposing forces met in midair, erupting in a series of cataclysmic explosions that tore the sky apart. The shockwaves alone were strong enough to crack buildings for miles around, but they broke harmlessly against the Grimori-led defensive barrier. While the titans clashed above, the second wave of purifiers descended. Their target no longer the ground, but the defenders. They moved with silent, deadly grace, a flood of golden armor and lethal energy swords. For our lord, Albedo's voice was a battle cry of pure, joyous fury. She shot into the sky like a black comet, her massive battle axe Ginnungagap held high. She met the first wave of purifiers head-on, and the sky became her abattoir. Her movements were a brutal, elegant dance of death. Ginnungagap was not just a heavy weapon, it was a whirlwind of destruction. Each swing cleaved through 3 or 4 purifiers at a time, their DxD-based armor shattering like glass against her overwhelming physical strength. She was a Valkyrie in a field of lesser angels, a true overseer of a one-woman army. But there were too many of them. For every one she cut down, 2 more took its place, their attacks relentless, their coordination perfect. Suddenly, a wave of raw, chaotic power, a vibrant, destructive magenta, erupted from the grow. ND and slammed into a cluster of purifiers that were about to overwhelm Albedo from behind. The angelic beings shrieked as the power, a chaotic fusion of demonic energy, tore them apart. Albedo glanced down and saw Mio, standing on the roof of the club, her hands outstretched, her eyes glowing with the same magenta light. Basara stood protectively beside her, his holy sword deflecting stray energy blasts, while Maria generated smaller shields to protect them both. Mio was terrified, her whole body shaking, but she was fighting. She was using the very power she had feared to protect the person who had protected her. A genuine, fierce smile touched Albedo's lips. Good, she grunted, before turning back to the fray, her axe a blur of motion. The battle was a symphony of chaos. Naruto and his tailed beast avatars held the line against Lyriel and the main legion, their battle a clash of gods that painted the sky in explosions of gold, black, and red. Albedo was a whirlwind of death in the thick of the descending troops. And on the ground, Rias and her peerage held the line, their barrier straining but holding, while Mio provided desperately needed, if uncontrolled, artillery support from the rooftop. They were fighting as a unit. A desperate, outnumbered, but utterly determined family. Naruto locked eyes with Lyriel across the churning battlefield. He knew that taking out the foot soldiers was pointless. As long as the gate was open and their leader stood, more would keep coming. He had to end this at the source. He made a decision. He dismissed the tailed beast constructs, the IR forms dissolving back into his own chakra. The sudden lull in the fighting gave the purifiers a moment of hope. It was a fatal miscalculation. Naruto brought his hands together in a familiar seal. Sage art. Massive Rasengan. But this was no normal Rasengan. He poured a torrent of the maelstrom into it, the god tree's life-giving energy and Kagaya's void power swirling into a horrifying vortex. The resulting sphere was not blue. It was a churning, unstable ball of pure, white gold chaos, the size of a small building, crackling with black lightning. It didn't spin. It warped the space around it. Lyriel's impassive face finally showed a flicker of something, surprise. It recognized the technique, but not the power fueling it. Less than, impossible energy density, greater than. Naruto didn't throw it, he thrust his hand forward. And the maelstrom Rasengan shot across the sky like a meteor. It didn't aim for Lyriel. It aimed for the celestial gate. Lyriel moved to intercept, appearing in front of the attack. Its hands raised to create a barrier of absolute law. The Rasengan hit the barrier, and for a moment, it held. But the maelstrom was not just energy, it was chaos. It did not break the law, it rewrote it. The barrier cracked, then shattered. The maelstrom Rasengan slammed into the celestial gate. There was no sound. There was only light. A silent, all-consuming explosion of reality-breaking power. The gate, a stable, perfectly engineered portal between dimensions, destabilized catastrophically. It didn't close. It collapsed, imploding with the force of a dying star. The resulting void acted like a cosmic vacuum cleaner, sucking in everything nearby. The Purifier Legion, caught in the implosion, was instantly annihilated, their forms shredded and pulled into the collapsing rift before it sealed itself shut, leaving behind a sky scarred with the afterimage of its destruction. Only Lyriel remained. It had been thrown back by the blast, its golden armor cracked and smoking, one of its wings torn and ragged. For the first time, it looked damaged. It stared at Naruto, its calm, clinical gaze now holding a sliver of something new. Respect. No, it was a re-evaluation of a threat. Less than, yo, you have exceeded projected combat parameters, anomaly, greater than Lyriel stated, its voice now holding a faint trace of static. Less than, your capacity for generating chaotic, anti-structural energy is a greater threat than calculated. Greater than, Naruto floated before it, breathing heavily, the massive attack having taken a visible, if minor, toll. This is your only warning, he panted. Leave this world. Leave my people alone. Don't come back. Lyriel slowly straightened, its broken wing twitching. Less than, this changes nothing. A cancer that fights back is still a cancer. The Arbiter's judgment is absolute. We will adapt. We will return. The Great Warden, Metatron, has already passed sentence. Greater than its form began to shimmer, preparing to teleport away. Less than, your reality will be unwritten. It is not a threat. It is a mathematical certainty. Greater than, before Lyriel could vanish, Naruto moved. He appeared directly in front of it, his hand clamping down on its shoulder armor. I'm keeping this, he said. With a sharp twist and a sickening crunch of ethereal metal, he tore Lyriel's damaged wing from its back. Lyriel let out a short, sharp gasp, the first sound of pain any of them had heard from it. It stared at Naruto with wide, hawked eyes before its emergency teleportation kicked in, its form vanishing in a flash of golden light, leaving Naruto floating alone in the silent, scarred sky, holding a single, massive, broken wing made of solidified light. He looked at the trophy in his hand, then let it fall. It dissolved into motes of golden dust before it hit the ground. The battle was over. The immediate threat was gone. They had won. He descended to the roof of the club, where Rias, Albedo, Mio, and all the others were gathering, looking up at him with expressions of pure, unadulterated awe. The defensive barrier fell, the campus below miraculously untouched. He landed softly, his legs feeling a little weak. The calm finally hit him, and with it, the exhaustion. He had just declared war on the self-proclaimed janitors of the multiverse. Rias was the first to reach him. She didn't say anything. She just threw her arms around him in a fierce, tight hug. A moment later, a crying, laughing Mio joined in from the other side. Then Albedo, ever the guardian, wrapped her strong arms around all three of them, her black wings unfurling to create a protective canopy, her face buried in Naruto's shoulder. They stood there for a long time on the rooftop. A strange, battered, but victorious family, huddled together under the wounded sky. The Golden Crusade had been repelled. But they all knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that this was only the first battle. And the next time the Wardens came, they would not be sending a legion. They would be sending an executioner. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Court of the Maelstrom. The sky above Kuo town bore no physical scars from the battle, but the wound on the world's psyche was deep and festering. A celestial army had appeared, made a declaration of cosmic war, and been annihilated by a force that defied every known law of magic and physics. The event, cloaked from human eyes by a massive, last-minute illusion spell courtesy of the Grimoire and Citri clans, had sent shockwaves through the supernatural world. Every faction, from the highest echelons of heaven to the darkest pits of the underworld, was in a state of frantic, terrified speculation. They called it the Day of Golden Light, and at the center of it all was the Occult Research Club building, now less a high school club and more the most important, and most feared, piece of real estate on the planet. Inside, a summit was being held. Not a grand, formal affair in a gilded hall, but a tense, impromptu meeting in a room that still smelled faintly of ozone and fear. The leaders of the three factions, or their chosen representatives, had come to Naruto. They hadn't been summoned. They had simply appeared, their urgency overriding all diplomatic protocol. Sears X Lucifer, Hi's usual kind smile replaced by a look of profound gravity, sat on one of the velvet sofas. Beside him was a figure cloaked in white, radiating a gentle but powerful holy aura, the Archangel Michael, his serene face etched with concern. And lounging in an armchair with a carefully cultivated nonchalance that failed to hide his own tension was Azazel, the Governor General of the Fallen Angels, his many black wings folded neatly behind him. Rias stood by her brother's side, a silent but potent presence. Basara and her peerage formed a loose, protective perimeter around the room. Mio, holding a cup, Of tea with hands that had finally stopped shaking, sat near Naruto, her proximity to him a source of visible comfort. And Naruto sat in his usual chair, facing the three most powerful leaders in this world. At his right hand, standing with an unwavering, protective stillness, was Albedo. Her face was impassive, but her golden eyes missed nothing. She was no longer just a bodyguard, she was the acknowledged royal guard. Her presence a clear and non-negotiable statement. "What you did, Naruto-san," Michael began, his voice soft but resonant, "was a miracle. You saved not only this town but Ely prevented a conflict that would have engulfed us all. On behalf of heaven, we owe you a debt of gratitude." "Gratitude is nice," Azazel cut in, leaning forward with a wry grin. "But it doesn't tell us what the hell we're fighting. Wardens of order, sterilization protocol. I've been around for a few millennia, read every spooky text from here to the shores of Styx. Never heard of them." He looked directly at Naruto. "You have. You knew what they were." All eyes turned to Naruto. He took a slow sip of his tea, the silence stretching. "They're not from this universe," he said finally, his voice calm and even. "Where I come from, they were a myth. Cosmic janitors. Beings from a higher plane of existence whose only purpose is to maintain balance. They prune realities they deem too chaotic or too powerful, to prevent them from contaminating others." He set his cup down. "They're not evil. They're not malicious. They're just order. Absolute, unfeeling, and utterly relentless. In their eyes, a universe with true free will, with the potential for infinite growth, is a cosmic cancer. It's a bug in the system." The simple, factual explanation was more terrifying than any tale of a demonic invasion. This wasn't an enemy they could reason with, bribe, or intimidate. They were a force of nature with a divine mandate. And they've judged you, and by extension this entire world, as a cancer, Sirzex said grimly. "Because of your power. Because of my existence," Naruto corrected. "I'm a paradox, a being from a dead universe, fused with its divine lifeblood. I shouldn't exist, and my being here is loud. It's a beacon, but it's not just me anymore." His gaze swept over Rias, Mio, and Albedo. "They called you corrupted data. That means they're not just targeting me now. They're targeting anyone who stands with me. They're targeting this world." A heavy silence fell over the room. The leaders of the three factions, beings who had commanded armies and shaped history, were faced with an enemy that considered their entire reality to be a rounding error. "We cannot fight them alone," Michael said, his voice firm with conviction. "The Great War weakened us all. Divided, we will be pruned, one by one. The time for our old conflicts is over. We must form a true alliance. All of us, together." "An alliance is easy to say," Azazel countered, steepling his fingers. "But who leads it? Who calls the shots? We've got centuries of bad blood between our factions. Angels, devils, fallen, we don't exactly trust each other's command structures." He gestured with his thumb towards Naruto. "Then there's him. He's not one of us. He's a fourth party, a party of one with the firepower of a nation. Any alliance has to include him, but he doesn't answer to any of us." This was the heart of the issue. They needed Naruto's power, but they couldn't command it. He was a sovereign entity, unbound by their laws, their history, or their politics. It was Rias who spoke, her voice clear and strong, stepping out from her brother's shadow. "You're all looking at this the wrong way," she said, surprising everyone. "You're trying to fit Naruto into our existing power structure. You can't. You're trying to figure out how to command him, how to make him an asset for the devils, or the angels, or the fallen." She walked to the center of the room, her crimson hair a defiant banner. "Naruto isn't an asset to be deployed. He's a leader to be followed. He didn't just fight for himself out there. He fought for us, for this school, for this town. He has already proven he is willing to stand as this world's shield. The question isn't how we can use him. It's how we can stand with him." Her passionate, fiercely loyal declaration hung in the air. Sirzex looked at his sister with a newfound, profound respect. She wasn't just a pawn in a political game anymore. She was a queen in her own right, making her play. "She's right," Naruto said, his voice drawing all attention back to him. "I'm not going to be your weapon. I don't care about your territories, your titles, or your old grudges. I care about the people in this room. I care about the people in this town. If you want to fight the wardens, then you'll fight alongside me. Not under me, alongside me. We protect this world together, as equals. He then looked at a corner of the room, where a small, shimmering cube floated in the air, a captured purifier. Its form contained within a Grimoire stasis field. Albedo had kept one alive for interrogation. But first, you need to understand exactly what it is you're choosing to fight. He gestured, and the stasis field dissolved. The golden armored purifier crumpled to the floor, its power suppressed but its consciousness intact. Tell them, Naruto commanded. Tell them why you do what you do. Convince them to stand down. Tell them why their fight is hopeless. The purifier rose to its knees, its featureless helm fixed on the assembled leaders. A cold, telepathic voice, identical to Lyriel's, filled their minds. Less than, our purpose is not a matter of ideology. It is a matter of cosmic law. The multiverse is a delicate structure. Unchecked growth, chaotic variables, they lead to systemic collapse. Your emotions, your ambitions, your very free will, they are the source of this chaos. Greater than, the voice turned its focus to Naruto. Less than, he is the ultimate expression of this chaos. An entity of amalgamated, paradoxical power. His love for you is not a virtue, it is a vector for infection. His protection is not a shield, it is the seed of a tumor. By clinging to him, you accelerate your own reality's demise. Greater than, the purifier then addressed the leaders. Less than, logically, your only course of action is to aid us. Help us remove the anomaly. In return, the wardens will spare this timeline from immediate pruning. Your existence will be permitted, under observation. It is the only rational choice. To fight us is to fight entropy. To fight us is to fight mathematics. You cannot win. Greater than, the cold, inescapable logic was a poison dart to the heart of their resolve. It offered them a deal. Sell out Naruto, and buy a little more time on death row. Azazel frowned, chewing on his lip. Michael's serene face was troubled. Even Sirzex seemed to be weighing the terrible calculus. Naruto didn't argue. He didn't debate the logic. He just stood up and walked over to the kneeling purifier. You're right, he said. And the admission shocked everyone. You're probably right. From a purely logical standpoint, fighting you is insane. It's irrational. It's emotional. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each of his companions. On Rias's fierce pride, on Akino's hidden pain, on Kiba's quiet loyalty, on Kaniko's silent strength, on Mio's dawning courage, on Albedo's absolute, confusing, and powerful devotion. But you left one thing out of your equation, Naruto said, turning back to the purifier. You say our emotions are a flaw. A bug. You're wrong. They're the whole point. He knelt, bringing himself face to face with the divine soldier. I've seen a world die. I held it in my hands as it crumbled to dust. And you know what was left? Not logic, not order, just the memory of the people I loved. The bonds we shared. That's all that ever matters. It's the only thing that's real. His voice grew stronger, filled with a charisma and conviction that was more powerful than any logical argument. So, you can tell your arbiter, your warden Metatron, that we're not going to stand down. We're not going to behave. We're going to live. We're going to love. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be messy and chaotic and unpredictable. We are going to fight for our right to exist, not as data in your perfect system, but as people. He stood up and looked at Sirzex, Michael, and Azazel. That's my answer. Now you have to give yours. Are you with us? The choice was clear. The cold, sterile logic of the wardens, or the passionate, irrational, and undeniable BL. Why human conviction of the man who had stood against them and won? Sirzex was the first to stand. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. My sister chose to stand with you, Naruto-kun. The House of Grimoire stands with you. Michael stood next. Our father taught us that free will is the greatest of all his gifts. We will not surrender it to a cold equation. Heaven stands with you. Finally, Azazel let out a loud laugh, slapping his knee as he stood. Well, hell, I was a bug in the system, long before you showed up. Fighting a hopeless battle against uptight cosmic gods. Sounds like my kind of party. The fallen are in. The alliance was forged, not on a treaty, but on a shared declaration of defiance. Naruto nodded, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Good. Because we're going to need a better place to plan than a high school club room. He closed his eyes. The others watched, unsure of what he was doing. He wasn't gathering energy or preparing an attack. He was reaching deep into the maelstrom within him, past the chaotic fury of Kagaya's void, past the raw power of the tailed beasts, and into the very heart of the god tree's energy, the power of creation itself. He remembered the feeling of Kagaya creating her dimensions. It was a memory, an instinct now buried deep within him. The ability to weave a world from nothing but will and energy. What is he doing? Azazel whispered, his researcher's curiosity overriding everything else. The energy pouring off Naruto was unlike anything he had ever sensed. It was the smell of fresh soil after a rainstorm, the feeling of the sun on your skin. The sound of a growing forest, all condensed into a single point. The space in the center of the club room began to warp. It didn't tear or break, it blossomed. A sphere of shimmering, kaleidoscopic light expanded outwards, pushing the furniture and the people back. It wasn't violent, it was gentle, like a sunrise. Through the shimmering veil, they could see not a void, but a world being born. Jagged, floating islands of black rock, held aloft by an unseen force. Waterfalls that flowed upwards into swirling clouds of mist. Strange, glowing flora that pulsed with a soft, internal light. And at the center of it all, a citadel of black stone and crystal, rising to meet a sky of perpetual, beautiful twilight, filled with swirling purple and gold nebulae. Naruto opened his eyes, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. The sphere of light solidified into a permanent, shimmering doorway, a portal humming with a quiet power. I can't protect the whole world, Naruto said, his voice slightly strained. But I can build us a sanctuary. A place outside of their reach. A fortress where we can gather our strength, where our people can be safe. He gestured to the portal. This is our new home. Our base of operations. A sovereign territory, bound to no law but our own. Albedo stared into the newborn dimension, her golden eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated awe and love. This was what a supreme being did. Not just destroy, but create. He had built them a home. He had built her a domain to oversee. It needs a name, Rias said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Naruto looked at the swirling, chaotic, yet beautiful world he had just created. He looked at the faces of the people who had chosen to stand with him, this strange, patchwork family of devils, angels, fallen, heroes, and programmed constructs. We'll call it the Court of the Maelstrom, he declared. The night before they were to formally move their operations to the new dimension. An unspoken emotional tension finally came to a head. Naruto was on the roof of the club, looking up at the stars, when the door opened. Rias, Mio, and Albedo walked out, their expressions a complex mixture of resolve and vulnerability. We need to talk, Rias said, her usual commanding tone softened by a rare uncertainty. Naruto turned, already knowing what this was about. The unspoken feelings, the complicated dynamics. The life and death stakes had brought everything to a boiling point. I am a Grimoire, Rias began, her hands clasped tightly. I was raised to think in terms of contracts, of peerages, of political advantage. I was drawn to you because of your power. I wanted you for my own. But that's not what I feel anymore. When you fought for my freedom against Riser. When you stood against that army for all of us. I saw the man, not the power. And she took a deep breath, her pride warring with her heart. I have fallen in love with that man. Before Naruto could respond, Mio stepped forward, her shyness replaced by a fierce determination he had never seen in her before. You saved me, she said, her voice clear and strong. Not just from Zolgir, but from myself. You took my curse and turned it into your promise. You showed me that my power doesn't have to be a source of fear. You gave me hope. You gave me a home. She looked him in the eye, tears shimmering but not falling. My feelings for you, they're not just gratitude. I love you, Naruto. Finally, Albedo stepped forward, her expression the most conflicted of all. My lord, she began, her voice tight with an internal struggle. My love for you was programmed. A directive. It was perfect, absolute, and hollow. She looked down at her hands. But you did not treat me as a creation. You treated me as a person. You asked me what I wanted. You challenged me to be more than my programming. She looked up, her golden eyes burning with a new, genuine fire. This feeling I have now, it is messy. It is confusing. It is painful, sometimes. But it is mine. It is not a program. It is my choice. And I choose to love you, Naruto. With every fiber of my being. 3 declarations. 3 hearts laid bare on the rooftop. They looked at each other, then at him, a silent, tense triangle of love and hope and fear. Naruto was silent for a long moment, the weight of their words settling over him. He walked forward, stopping in front of them. He didn't look at one, but at all 3. When I lost my world, he began, his voice thick with a pain he rarely showed, I lost everything. My friends, my home, my purpose. I was just a memory, an echo. I came here, and I was alone. Utterly alone. He reached out, his hands hovering just above theirs. And then I met you. Rias, you gave me a place to stay. Even if you were trying to figure out how to use me, he said with a small smile, and Rias blushed but didn't deny it. You showed me that even in a new world, there were people worth fighting for. He turned his gaze to Mio. Mio, you reminded me of who I used to be. You reminded me that protecting the innocent is a reason to live, not just a duty. You helped me find a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. Finally, he looked at Albedo. And you were born from my power, and you look at me like I'm some kind of god. But you're the one who's shown me what it really means to build something new. To create a bond from nothing. He took their hands. Rias's on his left, Mio's on his right, and then he reached up and gently touched Albedo's cheek. I don't see a collection. I don't see a harem, he said. His voice firm and full of an emotional clarity that washed away all their fears. I see my precious people. My partners. My family. I love you, Rias. I love you, Mio. I love you, Albedo. I won't choose between you. I choose all of you. It wasn't a king claiming his spoils. It was a man, raw and honest, offering his heart to the women who had given him a reason to have one again. Tears streamed down their faces now, tears of relief, of joy. Rias surged forward, kissing him with all her pent-up passion. Mio, emboldened, did the same a moment later, her kiss shy but full of a deep, heartfelt emotion. And Albedo, letting go of her last restraint, kissed him with a devotion so pure and powerful it felt like a physical force. They stood there, under the stars, no longer just a leader and his followers. But a true, if utterly unconventional, family. They were the heart of the maelstrom, a chaotic, messy, and beautiful bond that would be the true foundation of their new court. Chapter 6 End.